Well, how about that? A couple episodes in so far. I've been having a lot of fun learning a lot. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different. Instead of talking about collections and experiences, I wanted to reach out to one of the people that really helped me along the way when it came to understanding cell collections, animation art, production art, just in general. What are those frequently asked questions that newbies like me had? I reached out to people on Reddit, and there's one guy that seems to try to answer as many questions as possible. His name is Russ, OtakuRuss. He's someone that's over in the UK, so we had a little bit of a time difference. You'll hear the great accent here in a moment. But I know there's cell collecting all over the world, and different parts of the world collect different things. Today, we're going to mainly focus on what are those big questions for a newbie, someone that wants to get into it, maybe feeling that I'm intimidated. There's all these people, they know what they're doing, and I have no idea what I'm doing. So, Otaku Russ is going to be able to talk about that here today, and I'm really happy to bring him on to the YouTube channel. OtakuRuss is someone that I have talked to on Reddit for the last couple of years, and he's also someone that I've noticed is super friendly to new people to animation cell collection. And I know that in a way, people look for forums to talk about things. Reddit's one of those common places where people come in, and sometimes they have some questions, and they ask the same things over and over again without bothering to look what was already asked, what was already discussed there. So one of the things I noticed is that, hey, there's this one guy that keeps answering them all very friendly in a way where he could say, okay, here's everything you'll probably need to know above and beyond of what you asked. And he's someone that's done that for me. OtakuRuss, who joins us here right now. How are you, man? Thank you for doing this.
Ohio. It's fantastic to be here. I've really enjoyed the chats you've done so far with the other collectors, hoping to live up to that high standard. And yeah, so I'm the guy who has a lot of free time on Reddit. Apparently, that's how I'm known.
Well, you're one of the nice people on Reddit. There's not always nice people in social media places, and I've noticed you've gone out of your way to really help people in a particularly new collectors learn a thing or two, like myself, who find themselves either gifting or gifted a cell or buying one, and they're like, what do I do with it now? I don't want this thing to get damaged. What's the proper way to store it? What do I do if I want to frame it? What if it smells weird? What if how much is it worth? Is it real? There's like a million different questions that people ask on the Reddit forum, and I think it's a good place for people to learn. But if you weren't on it, I don't know if people would be learning on Reddit. Like, you are the main driver of helping people learn. So you've encountered a lot of new people like myself who have messaged you and asked you questions. What are type of things that newbies, the ones that just want to start collecting animation cells, need to know?
Okay. Well, I mean, I think the thing, as you've already kind of come across in the interviews you've done with the other collectors, is that the problem with cell collecting, production art collecting in general, is that there's a really steep learning curve. There's a really big barrier to entry, unlike other collectibles, unlike other things that people are interested in. You know, Pokemon cards are really easy to understand. You know, there's, a card, it's got a picture of a Pokemon, some are more valuable or rare than others. But with cells, there's whole other layers to it in terms of, what is production art? How do you know it's real? How do you know it's actually what was used in the production? Where do you go to buy it? By definition, this is not for sale material. These are not things that were made commercially. By and large, these aren't, products that were made to be sold in a shop. It's in essence a gray market. So basically, the vast majority of stuff that you see on the market was not put there by the studio on purpose. It was, at least historically, largely put there by individual animators, people who, left the office with a box of stuff, and eventually either they or somebody else found it and started selling it. And, for a long time, it wasn't a material that was considered valuable. It was literally toxic waste. That was the Japanese studios. Their approach to it was, this stuff is, the materials and that, not good to keep lying around. We can't dispose of it safely. Let's just sell it to people who like the show, and, they can worry about it on an individual basis.
I love that. Considered toxic
yeah.
waste, because,
Yeah.
there is gases and things that come off of these.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think trying to bring it back to, I guess, what your real question was in terms of, what are the sort of the main questions, the main kind of initial things that people want to know. I guess you've got the really basic stuff, like what is what is production art? What is a cel? That if you're in the hobby, if you're a collector, these things seem really obvious. But if you're someone who's just encountering it all for the first time, not just the word cel, but all the other different types of production art and the different words that are used to, refer to a particular type of sketch, and, what is hand drawn, what is printed, what is original, what is a copy, those are things that people have really basic questions about. I think beyond that, once people understand what it is, they basically want to know, why do people collect this? That, and again, to collectors, that might seem like a really obvious thing, but for people who are just discovering that art and understand that there's a huge number of people, and a growing number, that are spending huge amounts of money on it, there's a real question there about, well, why are people doing that? So why do people collect? I think then you get into the anxieties, which is, how do you store art properly? People are very aware, at least initially, that there's a problem with how fragile cels are. They're not products that were made for, longevity. They were never intended to exist beyond the initial act of production. And as such, they're delicate things. And that scares people. And so people have a lot of questions about, how do I store it? Do I frame it? Do I, put it in an art portfolio? Those kind of things. And I think, beyond that, there's then the wider concern about, is it real? Is it authentic? And you have that with all collectibles. But I think with art, that's always been a unique concern, because effectively, if you think about other collectibles, they're largely mass-produced things. So even Pokemon cards, it's one of whatever. The unique selling point with production art, or any work of art, is in essence that you are buying something completely unique. It is a unique work of art, and its value is largely derived from its connection to the original act of production, the original film, the TV show, what you see on screen. So for people who are, unsure about how to authenticate stuff, and aware that, copies exist, either official copies, or, people nefariously, squirreling away and making fake Disney cels or things like that, that's a huge source of anxiety, because, particularly when you get at the high end, you don't want to spend hundreds, thousands of dollars on something that isn't what you're paying for. So I think that's time and time again that kind of comes up. And then I think, and then just how do you find specific stuff? Because most people have particular tastes or particular series or things that they're trying to find, and knowing where to buy things in general is one thing, but knowing where to find something that seemingly is incredibly rare or niche, that is a unique skill set, which is normally where I come in on Reddit, because I just enjoy vicariously living through other people's hunts for obscure stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting, because if you're watching a cartoon that you've enjoyed, and one of the hot cels that you always see for sale are like Simpsons, and those are always some pretty valuable cels. They go from 300, 400, 500 to a couple of thousand if it's super rare. And it's, in a lot of ways, you're like, I remember watching that scene and laughing so hard. And that's why it brought some sort of memory to me, that just that picture of it brings a lot of joy. But I never watched Simpsons thinking I want to own that one frame of that one scene. Like, in the moment, I wasn't watching that sort of thing. And I think in retrospective, I wasn't thinking that way. I think collectors, in a way, go by the feeling of, what does that on the actual cel, what does it make me feel? Does it bring back that laugh? Does it make me smile? And what's nice about that is, too, there's always going to be multiple in a certain line of frames, or there's going to be a lot of that one character in different situations. You might not even know what scene it's from, but that one character, the one way it's drawn, or the one reaction could always give you some sort of funny, fuzzy feeling. And I think that's why a lot of people do collect, at least for me. I found the best way to really get started was to hold one and examine it. So, go buy like a cheap cel. If you can go on eBay and get a $5 cel, because there's a lot of them that you can get for $5, just get one, hold it and feel it, and see if it brings you any emotion. And if it does, then this might be something worth collecting. Because for me, I've done it for the last couple of years and I love it. It's been fun collecting these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think, kind of touching on what you just said there, I guess starting off with the question, why do people collect production art? I would say there's basically four main reasons that people collect production art. One of them is because they love something and they love the show or the character. And it is a uniquely physical way of taking personal ownership of a character or show that you love. So, if you grew up and you loved a particular series and you have a cel of that character, that you own a little piece of that. So I think that's number one. I think number two, people just like collecting stuff. And I think there is inherent within any collectible an attraction to the activity of finding things, of collecting, of comparing with other people. So I think there are some people who, just collect because they enjoy the experience of collecting. And it just so happens to be production art. And often those people collect a lot of other stuff as well. I think that's very common. You see people all the time coming to, myself, I came to, collecting art and production art from collecting other stuff. And then gradually you come to that. I think the third group of people is basically people who just enjoy it as art. They, don't necessarily have a particular connection to the individual character or the show, or even the a fascination with animation, but they just see something and they think that looks beautiful. And I think you also, with more hardcore collectors, you kind of see that in terms of there are some people who have very specific, they're collecting a particular series or they collect particular types of art. But there are a lot of collectors, particularly the people who collect a lot, who they'll have that stuff, but then they'll also just occasionally see something and go, I never watched that show. I don't know what it's about, but that is a beautiful image. It's a nice price. And I want to look at that every day, independent of the context of the original work. And I think the final category, which is perhaps the most controversial and probably the biggest growing group of people involved in collecting art, is investors. And they're kind of similar to the third category in that they often don't necessarily have any direct connection to the original work. It's not an emotional thing for them. It's just they see the mechanics of production art as a collectible and the market and how much it fluctuates, how rapidly it rises, and how, if I'm honest, being a little bit cynical, how open it is to very aggressive market manipulation. People very deliberately pumping up prices, and they look at it either long-term or short-term as a way to make, a lot of money. And some people do that quite shamelessly, and some people it's just, a side benefit of collecting or a way to fund future collection. But they're definitely a very separate group of people. And you can kind of tell, particularly in auctions and things like that, when those people get involved, you can sort of tell when prices get unrealistic or, when trends in the market start going rapidly in a particular way or with a particular auction house. It's obvious when the money has shown up, if that makes any sense. But
Yeah,
I think so. That's the four reasons people collect production art.
yeah. What do you think production art? Do you think it needs an influencer? Like, what was it? The one Paul brother that opened up a box of Pokemon cards, and all of a sudden, overnight, everyone's like, my Pokemon collection's worth $1 million because the one YouTube influencer decided to open one up. And it's like it drove the markets of interest into it. More people bought into it. And because there was a larger market and the finite amount of cards that were out there, it just kind of drove the price up. Do you think animation cels will ever have that sort of thing in the future? Or do you kind of see where it is now just kind of being a steady thing where you'll have, groups of collectors come in and out of it, but it's not going to ever be like Pokemon cards?
I think the thing about, I guess that brings us on to one of the other main questions that new collectors have. How much does production art cost? And, what is good value? What's it worth? What will it be worth? I think in really simple terms, as you and other kind of people who already collect will know, production art costs anything from less than $1 to, there's cels that have sold for literally $250,000. in Japan and other high profile auctions, it's not uncommon to see tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars changing hands over single cels, over single pieces of production art. I think in terms of, what production art's worth, and I guess what you're talking about in terms of, the market, I think going back to what I said before, the fundamental problem comparing it to other collectibles like Pokemon cards or retro video games is that you're essentially dealing with things that are not for sale. So they were never originally meant for sale. What that means is that, first of all, you don't have a base level price. So say, for example, like Star Wars collectibles, Star Wars collectibles go up in price, but there's an original base price in terms of, that lightsaber toy was originally worth $100. So no one's ever going to pay $5 million for a mass-produced Star Wars toy that was originally only worth $100. The problem with production art is, how much is the Mona Lisa worth? How much is, any piece of art worth? It's essentially completely subjective, and it's driven by the market, and it's supply and demand. And I think that's where the gray market causes a really big problem with production art, because it is almost impossible to quantify how much production art is available on the market or will be available in the future for any specific series. I mean, obviously there's exceptions, there's a few series or a few, particularly the North American studios, in the late 90s and early 2000s, they kind of experimented with the idea of commercializing production art. So things like SpongeBob SquarePants or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, those sales were through a third party, mass, marketed as merchandise and sold, and they had a set price, like $80. The problem is when you get like a sale from, say, a classic film like Akira or a Studio Ghibli sale, the question about what is that worth is, it's whatever you think it's worth. It's whatever people are willing to pay. And that's the problem. And the fact that it's not meant to be sold and that people generally have no way to quantify, how much is on the market to begin with, and will there ever be more again? It's a really difficult calculation for individuals to make about, in an abstract, objective sense, what's it worth? But also it's very personal. I mean, like you said, the difficulty is that you are not necessarily dealing with, particularly in auctions and situations like that, you're not dealing with people who are making abstract financial calculations about, there's this number of sales and things like, if people want something and it means a lot in their life and they are desperate for it, and there's more than one person who feels that way, the sky is the limit. I think the only issue that cels have in terms of an ultimate cap to where the market will go, I think it's tempting to say, cels keep going up, and eventually there'll be less of them available, and that'll push the price up. And, one day people will be paying £1 million for a Studio Ghibli cel. The issue is, though, they're very perishable. It's not a commodity that lasts. By definition, in couple of 100 years time, whenever it is, no matter how well you preserve a cel, it is in a constant state of decay. It is not going to exist, or it's not going to exist in the, pristine format it currently does today, if it's even survived that well. And I think that creates an obstacle, because I think at some point the market is going to have to reconcile with the fact, it's like, the tulip bubble, the very famous financial bubble where tulip sales, in whatever century it was, started, escalating, and eventually got to the point where people were buying tulip bulbs for the same price as a house. The problem is, you buy a house potentially lasts you for the next, half a millennia. You buy a tulip bulb, if you don't plant it, or even if you do plant it, great, you've got a flower for a week. And I think that is a major obstacle, which I think people are sort of blindly like, with the people who are paying $250,000 for a Studio Ghibli cel. I don't know if they've really got an answer to what happens when eventually the cruel ravages of time catches up with that cel, and it is no longer, what they bought. So wow. I don't know. I think, yeah, I think obviously cel collecting has become much more mainstream, and there are a lot of different reasons for that. YouTube, people, encountering content like this, I think also just in general, there's a few companies that have very aggressively marketed themselves, certain cell stores that are, targeting Facebook with ads and things like that. And I think particularly in terms of the anime stuff, which is obviously not all of the cell collecting, but it's a big, element of it.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that increasingly people have access to Japanese websites and effectively the Japanese marketplace,
Mm-hmm.
which is where, by definition, 99.9% of that content originally, comes from. The fact that people now have access to that through proxies that allow them to buy directly from, Japanese websites and auction places, it's opened up the hobby to a huge number of people who previously, didn't have access to it.
Wow, that's it's a lot of info right there. I'm gonna have to Google, what was it called? A Chewit bulb? I've never heard of that before.
No, tulips, like the flower.
Oh, tulips.
Tulips,
Oh,
yeah, tulips.
tulips.
My Britishness might be getting in the way of our understanding.
No,
but,
because I have the volume turned down, because I have a speaker over here and I didn't want it to feed back to the microphone. So I have it enough where I can hear it, but I must have missed that one part. You mentioned the Mona Lisa. I was thinking, wouldn't that be amazing if there was like multiple versions of it where she's like walking into frame and then she slowly looks into it and then walks away. And there's like multiple versions of it, kind of like animation cells where there's like motion. You can see a person walking across the cell or whatever. And there just happens to be the one valuable one's the one she's looking forward in. That's kind of like art. How about this? People are always wondering too about how to take care of their cells, because, they don't want their investment to be worth nothing. So they do want to find the right way to store the cell, hold on to it. What are ways that they could preserve their cell properly without damaging it? And is there any way to increase the value of your cell, like screen matching or anything like that, that would actually help your case of, okay, you bought it at X amount, you think it's worth more. How would you be able to prove it's worth more? So let's look at those couple angles.
I guess, in storage, as I know you'll already be very familiar with, the main debate amongst collectors is framing or art portfolios. And it's a pro-con for both. You've got a large number of people who like to have cells in frames, and they do that for basically two reasons. One, because they get to visually enjoy the cell every day. They get to look at it, see it on the wall. That's why they bought it, so they can enjoy it. Also, the act of framing, as long as you do it in a way that accommodates for the weaknesses of cells. So, for example, cells are very sensitive to UV light. Does not agree with them, dramatically increases the aging process, really does not react well to the materials that cells are made of. So, people who frame them, if you just pop it in, cheap frame with glass, it's not going to help, and it can do a lot of damage. But if you frame it with acid-free matting and UV-resistant acrylic glass and things like that, and you store it in a room that's not exposed to direct sunlight, like the cave I'm currently sitting in, then obviously that's potentially going to help the cell, and it insulates it from external contaminants. And my 3-year-old is not going to find it and decide that he'd like to draw on it because he thinks that Aska looks better with a mustache or something.
Yeah.
So there's that. So people frame it for all of those reasons. On the other side, and I think this is one of the things that I think confuses and maybe puts people off when they first investigate cell collecting, is you have a lot of angry people who come straight back at you and say, don't do that. It's the worst thing you can do. It's terrible. You'll destroy your cells. And, they're right and they're wrong. In an ideal sense, if you talk about the maximum, ability to extend the longevity of a cell. And I think you have to start with that understanding that cells are literally in a constant state of decomposition. From the moment you get them, they are always heading in the wrong direction. Much like us, we're finite things. We're beautiful, but we're finite. And it's all about preservation, and it's, not about, nips and tucks or whatever, but it's effectively with cells, what you're trying to do is minimize their exposure to UV and moisture and extreme temperatures. And one of the easiest, most obvious ways of doing that is to put them in an art portfolio, which is specifically designed for that purpose. Including them in, Life magazine bags is the most commonly sort of referred to brand, but, basically polypropylene bags that, act again as another safety barrier. They stop the paint sticking to other things, which is, the main way cells get damaged. They stick to paper or they stick to other surfaces. And then finally, microchamber paper, which is effectively a special type of thin paper that has pores in it that effectively they act as a trap that catches, contaminants in the air. And with cells, most importantly, it absorbs the gas and other byproducts of the cell breaking down. Because the main thing you want to avoid and the main thing to preserve a cell is avoiding vinegar syndrome. And again, that's this horrible, scary word that people start seeing a lot when they do research into how to look after cells. And in really simple terms, vinegar syndrome, because again, that's a very common question. People are always like, what is vinegar syndrome? Is it going to kill all my cells? How can I prevent this menace? And in really simple terms, all it means is that when cells start to go bad, like Walter White, when they start breaking bad, the chemical byproducts of that reaction, the gas and other substances that they emit, if it's in an enclosed space and it's trapped with the cell, it really speeds up the process. It's a catalyst. It's just fuel for the fire. So microchamber paper basically acts as, absorbs that and keeps it from, feeding back onto the cell. And then just, things like ventilating the cells, taking them out of the folder every now and again, airing them out. These are kind of basic cell maintenance. But I think the big debate amongst collectors is always, do you frame them, accepting there's a small risk that might cause, over a long period of time, some damage, but you get to enjoy looking at them every day? Or do you put them in a folder and keep them in a maximum, secure sort of environment where you have control over those things, but you don't get to stare at them?
So how often do you think someone should air out their cells if they keep them in a folder or a frame?
I mean, the kind of conventional, sort of number that you see quoted a lot in, anytime people are talking about that is usually every sort of, 2 to 3 months. Some people go longer. Again, I think it's a little bit like brushing your teeth or whatever. It's like, you want to do it, as often as possible. But I think obviously if the cells are kept in an appropriate art portfolio, and looked after in general, and you've got microchamber paper in there and all of those other things that you're doing to protect the cells, it's less important than, say, if you've just got like, a box, a literal, some people, have literally like a box in their attic full of cells that they've never taken out of a closed bag for like, however many years. In those cases, then, you're going to see more benefit. So I don't, some people very regularly take the cells out and, do that and do maintenance and even cleaning and things like that. The majority of the time, I would say, as long as every now and again you take them out or change the, the polypropylene bags over, you're probably going to be okay. They're going to be, if they're in the portfolio and you're, looking after them right, you don't have to worry about too much.
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes you talk to people and they're like, oh, I kept it in the shed out back for 2 years and 10 years or whatever. And then they look at them and they're fine. And you think, wow, was all of this maintenance necessary? And I don't know if it's that the cells are just more resilient than we're giving it credit for, or just some of them are on better material than others. Like some studios use better cell material to begin with, which kind of helps along with it. And some just use cheaper ones, or it's just luck. It just could be random luck. And you hear all the different stories and you don't know. You're like, okay, maybe I can get away with doing it once a year or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the irony is with the whole, I kept it in a shed for a year, I never took them out, and look, they look okay. I think the irony is that, if they're in a shed in a dark room, there's no sunlight. So yeah, they don't have to worry about UV damage, they're fine. And as long as, I mean, again, with cells, as long as they're not in an enclosed space, so like as long as they're not in like a sealed bag that's going to trap all of the excess gas with them and cause vinegar syndrome.
Mhm.
Realistically, they can survive. And I mean, you see evidence of that because, half of the cells out there on the market today are not coming from a museum that's been storing them since the day they were made in optimum conditions. They are coming out of some animator's garage where he goes, oh, I should probably make some money now off my career. I should sell these things. They're worth a few bucks on eBay. Although I will say, having done the long spiel about the two different schools of thought, the framing and art portfolio, I am a huge advocate of the third way.
Yes.
Which effectively, for me seems the most sensible. But, I don't know, people don't talk about it as much as I would imagine they should. But, one of the things a lot of people do as soon as they get cells, particularly if they're high value, is they scan them or they, take high quality photos of them. So they've got that, should something terrible happen to the cell. But what I personally do, and I would advise other people to do, especially if you have expensive cells, is don't frame the actual cell, keep the cell in the art portfolio and do all of that, maximum protection stuff, but frame prints of, the scans of the photos, because, they essentially retain almost 100%, of the visual appeal of the cell. The other massive advantage I find with cells are tricky to frame, not just because of the sensitivity of the cell and the materials that you have to use, but also just size wise. They're an awkward size. They're like sort of 10 by 12 or the larger cells, and often you have a lot of negative space. Some cells have a lot of paint coverage and they have a pretty complete image. Others, it's a small figure, or it's off on one side and the rest of the cell is blank. And the advantage of having, a frame of, a print effectively made from that is that you then have complete freedom to crop it. You can put it in small frames. They're easy to display, kind of have around the house. And I don't know, for me, I find that a much easier way because, like a lot of people, I guess, I don't have a mansion where I can put, I don't have a east wing where I can display, 100 cells on the wall. So it's easier for me to have a small number of them, in smaller frames, 8 by 10s that I have on my desk, or I swap in and out, and I think they look nice, and yeah.
That is cool. So you're over in the UK. Are you in BBC land?
Yes, we do. We do get the BBC over here, the British Broadcasting Corporation.
Right.
If we
Yeah.
didn't get
So,
it here, it would be a shame.
so, I don't know if they have this on the BBC here in the United States. There's a lot of this. Does the BBC or any broadcast entity there have paid programming like infomercials late at night?
I don't know if we get that specifically on BBC, but we have cable TV here, so we get the we get the 2 o'clock in the morning Master 2000s revolutionize your workout in just 5 minutes of exercise. You too can look this good.
Yeah, because what you're about to do was you're saying, oh, you can choose this or that. There must be a better way. This could be your $1 million late night infomercial idea for production art. There must be a better way. Are you tired of that vinegar smell? Ooh, PU. And they could do like a black and white picture, and they can do all of that. It's like perfect for late night. What
I'm
about
trying to work out in that analogy, am I Troy McClure or am I Dr. Nick? I don't know which one I am. I don't know if you
Troy
may remember
McClure,
me from such films as I push my wife down the stairs. So hi everybody.
I'm Troy McClure.
We found a way.
Oh man. Yeah. I I watched so much Simpsons in the 90s. It was my thing, after school. That's just what was on television. Well, I think part of collecting, I find that I'm obsessively watching and scanning eBay. So when you're looking for a specific piece, are there any tips or things that you do that helps you so you're not always on the internet searching for what you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think, going back to kind of, I guess, the theme of this discussion, what are the most common questions? That the biggest one is, where do you buy cell art?
Yeah.
And I think that, again, like you said, it basically falls into, essentially two categories, auction sites and art galleries / cell stores. So auction sites, you've obviously mentioned eBay. I think that's where people start looking because it's just where everyone buys stuff from. But I would say just because it's where you go to get like a cheap secondhand hairdryer does not mean it is the best place to go to get collectible art. And I think, for some things it's good. Like eBay is quite good for North American art because a lot of that stuff kind of ends up being sold there. But particularly for anime stuff, it's terrible. And it's uniquely terrible eBay because the majority of the listings on eBay for anime production art, sketches and cels are not people selling them directly, but people essentially relisting them from Japanese websites at hugely inflated prices. And that's why if people go on there, and again, this puts a lot of people off when they first start collecting, they'll see the same cel being sold ostensibly by like 5 different sellers for 5 different prices. And that's because the actual cel is being sold on a Japanese site, most likely Yahoo Japan Auctions, which because Japan does not have eBay, they have their own equivalent, which is Yahoo. And so, yeah. And I think, so there's, I think the simplest advice I would give to anyone in terms of where you look and whether you want to look on auction sites or you want to look on stores is it depends what you're looking for. Like say for anime stuff, generally going on Yahoo Japan Auctions or Mercari, the Japanese websites, that is where you will find a treasure trove of that material. And it is really easy to find stuff on there, even for, big stuff, popular series or obscure, niche things that, one episode of this in 1982. I think, in terms of tips for how you avoid just trawling through the 25,000 anime cel listings that they have at any one time on places like Yahoo, is you take advantage of save search functions. So essentially, the proxy sites that you use to browse Japanese websites in English language or other international languages, the main one being Bai, which is basically the official partner of Yahoo. They're like the international sales department for Bai, for Yahoo. They have an option that allows you to save a search, which effectively notifies you, via email when stuff gets listed. And then when you go on to your profile on the proxy, you can effectively click on that tab and, oh, look, there's, 80 cel listings for, Evangelion or, Dragon Ball Z or whatever. And I think that helps people in terms of, particularly if it's something really obscure, like if you're looking for some really, once in a blue moon listing for, obscure 1970s cartoon or something, having automatic searches that, alert you to new listings that, tag, those keywords, it's much more time effective than just, banging your head against the wall every day, checking on cel store sites or checking on every auction site you can think of. So, cut down on your legwork, take advantage of automation and automatic alerts where you can. I think also, just in a general sense, I mean, like I say, when you know what you want, it's much easier to find stuff. So if you are looking for example, North American stuff, there's no point looking on Yahoo because that's Japanese, so it's anime. So you can just, write that one off and focus on the places that, you do see stuff. And like I said, apart from the obvious like eBay, there are other auction sites, Heritage Auction, a few others that kind of focus on collectibles and art. There's art galleries. There's a selection of those that, and increasingly a growing number that do production art. And then there's a handful of mostly older now cel stores that very specifically, that's all they sell. And some of them skew towards anime stuff. Some of them skew towards, Western stuff, Disney and, specific niche things. And again, I mean, if you go on a lot of the cel communities on Reddit or on Facebook, there's kind of, I mean, like I have a standard list of those places that I send people to. And I say, look, here's the, 10 or 12 stores that deal with, American stuff. Here's the places to look for anime. So yeah, I think that made mostly sense.
That makes sense. Yeah. Some of the other things that I didn't know existed, but you taught me, as you've taught many other people is that if you don't know how to identify a cell, there's websites that are very good at, you can input a screenshot, it'll search here's kind of where the color matching is, and see if this is the anime you're looking for or the cartoon you're looking for. There are different services out there to help with things that if you're just trying to identify a random cell. And I think there's a lot of resources out there I don't think cell collectors really know about, including that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think I guess that kind of opens up the big can of worms that I guess we haven't touched yet, which is how do you know if a cell is real?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And I think that's probably a good time to pop the tag on that one. I mean, I think people, always ask that because it's their biggest concern, their single biggest concern when they buy something, whether it's $5 or $5,000. Is this the real cell that was used in, the show I like, the film I like? And my very basic, advice when people ask that is firstly to reassure them in that I would say that the vast majority of production art that you encounter on the market is real. And it's real for a very simple reason, which is that the skill level required and the materials required to make cells, and to some extent, production art sketches, it's pretty high. Like there's a lot of effort that goes into that. Now, if you're buying a $2 cell from an utterly obscure 90s kid show that no one in the world but you loves, you don't have to worry that someone has spent days, weeks, months, years faking that in their bedroom. That's real. I think where you do have to be more concerned, and I think go through a more rigid checklist of authenticating something before you buy it, is if you are spending a lot of money on one of the very popular series or films, things like Disney, Studio Ghibli, Simpsons, some of the big name anime series, where there is a financial incentive that makes it worthwhile for people to pass off fan cells or official replicas as real cells. And I think that's when you then get into authentication. And it's a really simple process. It's basically every time you do it, whether it's a $2 cell or a $10,000 cell, it's the same process. You start with, as you said, a screen match, because particularly with cells, if you are buying a cell from animation, the reason that it's valuable and fun to own is because it is the exact image that you see on screen. That is the original media that created what you see on screen. So what that means is that if you cannot get that to, if what you own does not match the supposed image exactly, and I'm talking about, to the millimeter, like tiny, variations and, blemishes and things like that, then you've got a problem, because, it should. Sketches and other forms of, sort of pre-production art, obviously there's a little bit more wiggle room. There's a little bit more sort of, room for subtle variations and things like that. But, basically it's a screen match. That's what you're looking for, is your main overriding reassurance that something is real. And then I think beyond that, you've then got the usual sort of common sense stuff of, price. If someone said you want to buy a Rolex, it's 50 cents, you would look at them and go, okay, it's not a Rolex, I know that. If someone says, hey, I've got this, Sleeping Beauty original Keymaster setup, $5, what do you think? That's not real, because it's the discrepancy between what it is worth on the market and what it's clearly worth in terms of time and effort and money is, it's just, yeah.
I would almost want to own a fake like that, just to say, I want something in comparison. I want to see and feel what that fake feels like. But I don't know if there is a way to just like purposely buy a fake without watching the person in the trench coat that's offering it to you in a parking garage.
Well, I mean, if that is your desire to own fake production art, yeah. It's relatively easy. It's, I think, again, you search for like Disney cells or, Pokemon or something like that. You set your price limit at like, $20, $50. and then just see what comes up. And it
Yeah.
probably, probably will be, it will be fake. You will have achieved your dream of owning some genuine fake production art.
See, I don't
Uh,
want to own a $50 fake. That hurts. Even if it is something that's claiming to be more than it is. Um, well, I know my kid upstairs is yelling. Well, not yelling, but he's almost ready for me. I told him I'd go out and play some baseball with him. So I want to make sure. Is there anything else we didn't cover? Something that would be good to let a newbie know?
Ooh, I'm trying to think. I mean, I guess what have we talked about?
We got a lot.
We've covered a lot of stuff there. I guess, I mean, I think my main piece of advice to people who start collecting production art is figure out what you want. And I know that sounds like the most obvious thing in the world, but with collecting, what has value to you, what you most want. Once you know that, then navigating the research and the process of figuring out where to buy it, how much to pay for it, and whether or not it's something you need in your life. Do you need a $2,000 Studio Ghibli cell in your life, or are you okay with a $25 He-Man cell or something like that? But I think just once you know what you're looking for and where you want to compromise, and I think that's for me, like for example, I often advise people when they first start collecting production art, look at things like sketches, storyboards, things like that as an entry to it, because they don't have any of the storage and fragility issues that cells do. They're usually much lower cost, partly because they're not what people see on screen, and just they're less valuable as a collectible. But they're a really good way to kind of get into it and go through the process of authentication and stuff like that. And I mean, a lot of people, I mean, personally, I collect a lot of sketch art because that's that's what I enjoy. But so I think not not rushing into spending your life savings on your dream cell straight away.
Yep.
Being patient, doing research, and I think above all, asking questions, because there's a lot of on Reddit and on Facebook, there's a lot of great communities for people like yourself and me who have similar interests in these things and have maybe been doing it a little bit longer and have at least some awareness of the pitfalls of making mistakes, of improperly handling things or spending too much on something, or buying from the wrong place. So I think just never be afraid to ask questions, because there are people like myself who have some time on their hands and are more than willing to sit down and write like a 5,000 word essay on where you can find a particular cell from Sailor Moon or something like that. So just ask for help. You might be pleasantly surprised.
OtakuRuss is your screen name on Reddit, and if anyone's been on there, they may have seen you post on it because you are someone that's very active on that forum and community, and you've helped me many times. I've direct messaged you, and you've always responded, which I don't know why. The kindness of strangers. You're one of those kind guys, and you've done a lot of good work to help newbies and people that are maybe even questioning why they should get into this hobby. And you've steered them in the right direction, which is pretty awesome. And I'm glad that we're able to hook up here today. Thank you so much for doing this.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And if people are on Reddit, ask me questions. I'll try and answer them, more concisely than I've done during this rambling 4-hour long TED talk on cel art.
Big thanks to OtakuRuss. He explained his name to me. He said it's kind of like the English equivalent of nerd or geek, a little bit different. It's more acceptable now than just even a couple of decades ago when I was a kid. But he's very insightful, and we could have gone another hour or two, and he's got so many great examples. We're going to have to bring him back on the podcast again because, limited amount of time equals trouble. So we're going to have to try it. And I'm really enjoying these conversations. And if you know anyone that would like to reach out and talk about their collection or maybe animation cells in general, and maybe there's someone like me that just doesn't have anyone to talk to and wants to talk about it, feel free to reach out to me. And thank you for all the support we've seen so far. We'll see you soon.